It's Learn Ubuntu Live, presented by LearnUbuntu.org, with your host, Tom Judge.
Welcome again to the Green Room. This presentation will cover the material from our chapter on the File Transfer Protocol, commonly known as FTP. This is from our Ubuntu Internet Fundamentals course, and this will be an overview of the material that we cover in this chapter. Chances are, if you're developing websites, at some point you will eventually have to use some means to transfer the files from your workstation to the web server, which is usually in a different location, and hence the use of the file transfer protocol. So let's take a look at this presentation and learn the basics of using FTP. The file transfer protocol, as we said earlier, is used to transfer files from your workstation via TCP/IP to a remote web server, as this illustration in our opening slide shows. And also, as we're showing here, there are multiple ways to do that. It could be done in your browser, or through a command line FTP, or through the Nautilus file browser. So let's take a look at these options that we have. As we said, if you want to be a real heavy-duty user, if you want to know your stuff, we suggest that you do not shy away from using it via the terminal window. We have a lab exercise coming up into an overview which shows you how to do that. Most browsers do support the FTP protocol, but generally they use to download files. As a developer, you're going to want to upload some files. And there's also many shareware FTP applications that you can download. However, the Nautilus file browser also supports FTP, and if you don't want to use the command line all the time, then the Nautilus is another option for transferring files using the FTP protocol. Many web design applications, such as Composer and Front Page and Dreamweaver and HomeSite, all use some form of FTP protocol in the background. They basically hide it behind their GUI. However, either way, you're going to use FTP to transfer files to a remote server. So let's learn about what the FTP protocol is. Now, again, we show the command line because many times if you're an administrator, you're going to wind up using a command line FTP protocol to do a quick transfer. You might be terminaled into a web server and want to FTP either content for that server or some updates for that server. You really do need to know how to use the FTP protocol. And this little chart here shows the basic FTP commands. FTP opens the FTP server application in a terminal window. Open is used to open a website. And then we have get and put. This is CD, by the way. Change directory, local change directory, change the directory on your local machine. Get, put, and mget, which is for a series of files. You're going to get a whole folder full of files. And there are many more FTP commands. The most important when you're done is buy. Here we show a terminal window, and we just typed help, and we get a list of all the commands. You can also type help and a command to get details on what that command does.
Here we're going to try an FTP session as a student would accessing one of our student servers. We'll type FTP and we'll open the server we've been assigned to. In this case, it's Students1. Helps you to spell it correctly. Students1.learnubuntu.org. And we use our login using our favorite student, John, who we use in all our examples, and his password. And now if we do a PWD, it shows us we're at the root. However, the root is his home folder, because if we do an LS, we see the public HTML folder that was made there for John, which is in his home folder. You can see the public HTML. Do an LS. He has an example he posted there, his first example. So if you happen to have decided to go for the extra few pesos here and got the student account on the server, hopefully the intention is to give you some more good learning experience.
Now, there's two forms of FTP, two basic forms. I'm not talking about secure FTP now, I'm talking about the standard FTP. There's passive and active. And we're showing you in this illustration of this slide, as well as in the reading for this chapter, the differences between those two commands. And it basically has to do with the ports that are used and whether or not you're going through a firewall. And as you see in the active FTP, we're using a higher port on the workstation side, but we're using port 20 on the server side. So it goes from port 20 to some higher port, which is determined at the time. With passive FTP, it's using a high port on both the client and the server.
Now you may have noticed that little message about P that you get. I'll show it to you here. FTP, open, students1.org, ubuntu.org, John and his password. And we do an LS. And we see port command successful, consider using PASV. What that means is we're going through a firewall. So we simply type passive. We'll do the same command again. And we don't get that annoying message because it entered passive mode and we got the directory listing without that. So you won't be getting that PASV message after you enter the passive command.
In the first lab exercise, we get right down to learning how to use FTP via the command line, which again is important. And I encourage you not to shy away from using the command terminal in many ways throughout the world of Linux. FTP is no exception to that. So in the first lab exercise, we show you how to use it. Now, if you don't have an FTP server you have access to, we show you how to access our FTP server. You can also apply for a student account to get a student account on a web server / FTP server if you like. Now, unfortunately, that's not free. We got to charge something to keep our doors open. Well, the course is free. If you need to use one of our servers to work, there is a small monthly charge for that. And the first lab exercise results, we can see that the permissions must be set correctly for the page to be viewed of our uploaded file. And here we show that we transfer the file to the John's public HTML. So that public folder has to have permissions for everybody to see it if they're not set correctly. You will be able to do that. In the first lab exercise here, we go over how to change permissions, because many times you may transfer a file, but then you may have to change the permissions so everybody else can see it on the web server. So that's why we cover that. And we went through some of these basic permission changes in the Learn Ubuntu Basics course, and here we're revisiting that and showing some practical uses for knowing how to do that. And here we're using chmod, CHMOD, and you can see we're using the shortcut, which is the binary method. Here we're doing we're showing the permissions of the machine. See, it says read write, read read. When you initially transfer it, you may have no read permissions for the group or for others. And what you really want is the read permissions for the others in order to have the page be viewable via the web server. In the second lab exercise, we're briefly showing you how you can use the Firefox browser to transfer files. And here we see that we downloaded the swordfish GIF via FTP to our public HTML folder images. We actually use this file later on in the course. This is a way of killing two birds at one stone. First, we show you how to use FTP and get the file. Then later on in the course, on the web graphics chapter, we're going to actually use that file that we downloaded. Lab exercise 3 shows us how to set up FTP in the Nautilus file browser. And this is a handy thing to use because you can use, it's a graphical interface, it's a GUI, you can drag and drop as you please to move your files from one place to the other. But keep in mind that you still may have to go back and reset the permissions. Lab exercise 3 results, we see that we were able to transfer the files. We also see that we can make a shortcut in our file browser to access that FTP site anytime we need, and it's handy to drag and drop files there. So as you can see, this was a very short and sweet presentation. We show you how to use FTP 3 ways: in your browser, in the Nautilus file browser, and also via command line. So that's 3 ways to use FTP. Now there are more ways than that. Obviously you can download a third-party FTP client. Not really necessary if you're using a bunch of Linux, because the Nautilus does a fine job, and so does the command line. So, as you can see, transferring files via FTP is a necessary skill to know as a web developer, and that's why we cover it here in this course. So we hope you enjoyed this brief but informative presentation, and now it's time to study the chapter on FTP, do the 3 lab exercises, and get some hands-on experience with this very valuable web developer's tool.
Portions of this program were pre-recorded.